this is not sort of news for historians per se, in the sense that we're left with issues about how do you deal with events, what is an event, and what perspective is adequate in thinking about an event. Sort of, this is the Ampo demonstrations that's the Japanese diet.
Could you explain that a little bit?
So I will indeed. So in 1960, there was going to be the renewal of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty. This is the treaty signed along with the peace treaty in 1952 that ended the occupation. And the security treaty put Japan basically under the U.S. security umbrella. It got Japan involved in our policies in Asia, all of our hot wars in Asia, the boycotting of mainland China, and it sort of worked in tandem with what rebuilt the Japanese economy post-war, which was Korean War procurements, tech transfers in the 50s that were done for security purposes in the first place, and Vietnam War procurements. So the economic resurgence in Japan, as it turned out, was intimately tied with wars in Asia, flat out, and that continued to be an issue. Although in Japan, the issue tended to be reduced to people's fears that the administration that was in power was returning back to an imperial Japan, a wartime fascist kind of regime. Kishi, who's the prime minister when this is going on, was part of the Tojo War Cabinet. He did slave labor in China, and was the munitions minister at one point, and is a very scary figure, and introduced things like a police bill asking for real scary state powers, but those kinds of issues obscured the everyday life issues. And when he stepped down at the end of this, they renewed the treaty, but he stepped down as a result of some of these protests and was replaced by a bureaucrat. And the bureaucrat, Prime Minister Ikeda, promised, okay, we're going to stop busting heads. We're going to have this low posture, and in 10 years we're going to double your incomes. And that got the attention of people who had lived with privation. I mean, wartime and afterwards, and the protests kind of melted away. This is June of 1960. Very quickly after the renewal in June, protests are nowhere to be found. Millions of people are involved in this stuff, strikes and so forth. Poof. And this is actually an issue for some of the artists. And the artists find themselves, this group of artists finds themselves with a kind of consciousness of events that's at real discord with official political types who are told when Nakanishi is involved with this one group of radicals who he says, look what happened to the protests, where'd they all go, and what do we do to get this going again? And he's told, calm down, the time is not right. And but what part of what was making these things go away was these transformations in everyday life and the promise of a better future. That was depoliticizing. Of course, it couldn't be more political. It's all tied to these wars and the relationship with the United States. And that became sort of a centerpiece for late 60s politics in Japan. But not yet. And it ends up being the case that artists are out in front in identifying some of these issues, the issues that become central to later 60s politics. Okay, so 1960 Anpo. And here's a picture of, that's the Diet, the Japanese Parliament, and here's a picture of some of the demonstrators. And here we have, I really love this. This is shot by Ishiguro Kenji, who's a portrait photographer, but he was there for this. This is the one of the Diet gates being broken through by the demonstrators, and this is especially fun. This is the economics department of Chuo University. Have their students have identified themselves with their sign. So you have the sign that says economics bursting through the gates. This is kind of fun for me and my argument. You can't read it here, but this sign says, golly, sorry about the war, kind of anticipating trouble. Okay, so here's an event. Here's a Diet, here's demonstrators. Which perspective is right? Which perspective is adequate? If you're standing here, what do you see of that? If you're here, I mean, this is significant and it makes a great photograph. It's certainly a photograph that speaks to me. That's wonderful. But what's an adequate way of dealing with an event of this size? And what's it for? One of the things that some of the artists clue into is, this is, what's a demonstration for? Here's all these people, right? And they do break into the Diet, though, into the grounds. They move some of the security trucks that are here, but they don't charge inside and beat up parliamentarians or anything of the sort. It's a spectacle, and it's meant to sort of dramatize. Okay, here's post-war democracy. Here's the people. See, and we stand in for the people, speaking to you guys, meaning don't do this. And the prime minister there, kind of anticipating Richard Nixon, says at the time, well, we're hearing these loud people out front, but I'm listening to the voiceless voices, the people who are quiet and sitting at home, who aren't out in front, and who really want me to do this. So thank you, but no thanks. From the perspective of some artists, what this is a really crappy art project. It's a spectacle, a performance whose audience is really not available, and it doesn't really capture anything in the moment. Okay, here's some of the battles within the grounds. Student leader Kamba Michiko is killed during this confrontation. You see the riot police surging in, and of course cameramen are on these trucks like here, and also this is being shot by another. Again, perspective. The other related issue for me is thinking about events in Japan within the context of the 60s in general. And I have argued that the 1960s is a global moment. And I've tried to, in my work, to explain what I mean by that. Part of the story with these artists has to do with the critique of everyday life, and that puts them in the company of things like the Situationists and Debord and a variety of other people, and junk art as well. And in the late 60s, it's a little bit of a different story. I actually have an article on 68 in Japan on my website if you care.